Hello again, you're listening to The Blockchain Socialist, and for today's interview, I have a special guest. His name is Onedime. He is a YouTuber who makes videos focused on politics with a particular focus on critical theory and pop culture. So hey Onedime, how you doing?
What's up? Yeah, I'm Onedime. I'm a leftist YouTuber. I make videos on politics, various issues, where I kind of bridge critical theory as well as pop culture. So I like to add a lot of theoretical analysis using various thinkers in critical theory and philosophy, but also make them very accessible so anyone can kind of watch, like also just be really entertaining. And yeah, I'm happy to be on The Blockchain Socialist as when I was looking for various YouTube channels or podcasts of leftists who were into crypto, I couldn't find many, and this podcast was one of the few ones, and it's really good.
That's why it's called The Blockchain Socialist, because there aren't that many others. So far, we're making more. Huh? But yeah, so I think I came across you, over Twitter, and I had taken a look at some of your videos, and they were pretty well made, and they were very, I don't know, you have like a very good analysis and like a very good flow as you go through your videos. And your most recent one was about the stock markets with a focus on particularly Warren Buffett. So I thought that was pretty interesting, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But maybe to start off, to get to know you a little bit more, maybe you can explain what got you started on making YouTube videos on left-wing politics, and what did you think was missing already on the landscape of LeftTube or BreadTube, however you want to call it?
Yeah. Well, I've been wanting to really make YouTube video essays for a very long time, but well, for one, I was in school a lot and also busy working, so maybe perhaps that was just an excuse, but it does limit time. But also, I wanted to really feel like I knew what I was talking about before getting into the sphere, because I mean, I've been reading critical theory for over 2 years now, and philosophy a lot before that. But I wanted to really know what I was talking about, at least a decent bit. So I spent a long time just really reading for a long time. And then COVID hit, and there was a lot of free time. And I had a ton of video ideas, and I said, let's give this a shot. I had my first video essay. I also have a friend who's a YouTuber, so he kind of helped shout me out a little bit. And I had my first YouTube video, which was the late capitalism of Jake Paul, kind of dissecting how people like the Pauls, people like these influencers, it's kind of meaningless to critique them as individuals, and more so that they're products of the capitalist system, both in terms of the culture of late capitalism, but also the literal economic incentives. And that video, if you see that, that's kind of, my opinion, poorly edited. And then I started seeing other videos, and I thought my analysis is better than a lot of theirs, but I just want to get my editing better. So I spent like 2 months just learning After Effects and Premiere, and yeah, and you can kind of see the improvement if you watch them. If I would say what was lacking, to answer that question, what is lacking on the LeftTube front? So I think, okay, there's kind of two camps. So there's like the BreadTube entertainment. You can find people like, I won't even name names because like I don't want to seem like they're not good or anything, but there's a lot of like BreadTubers who are just kind of entertainment, who are decent. And then there's a whole theory sphere, which is like TheoryTube, especially theory podcasts, which they're really, really good analysis, but it's almost just a bunch of nerds like having a circle jerk. And what I mean by that is that it's people talking about theory to other academic theory people, and they're not actually getting across these ideas which are often very important to, you know, like most people, like especially like leftists, they're really important. And like that's why I like YouTubers like Cuck Philosophy. I think he does a really good job of getting across important ideas to like a broad audience. And see, that's what I would say. Like people like him are important. I wish there was more channels like that, because what I think lacks is there's a lot of BreadTube with really shallow analysis of issues. and it's
Yeah.
often moralistic arguments. And then on the other end, you have a lot of good philosophy that literally makes no effort to make itself accessible or reachable to, the average viewer.
So you're trying to reach this sort of middle ground between the two.
Yeah, more or less. I'm trying to kind of sort of cross over a little bit into the film or media video essay and commentary world, but with like a
Yeah.
sort of critical theory lens, because I incorporate a lot of Marxist economics as well as even postmodern theory in some of my videos. And I feel like all of that adds, that's really important, to have like a deep, good analysis, but still make it entertaining.
So then maybe you don't have to think about this too much, but like one of the things that I've been wondering is whether like the same maybe type of criticism that you have for like the Jake Pauls and those type of influencers maybe contributes to the type of, I guess, what leads to the things that are lacking on the left tube front, where it seems to me that a lot of, not just some of them, like they, I guess, feel the pressure or they need to like produce content very often in order to like keep their YouTube views and like to keep their audience engaged, and like that's how like the platform works. So then they end up, yeah, I guess with kind of shallow analysis, because there's just no way you can take the amount of time that you probably need to do all of the amount of research to give like anything that is like truly insightful beyond like maybe like a day's worth of like your research on your own. But yeah, it's sort of like it becomes a super like meta critique of leftists now becoming victims to the exact same system that they're criticizing on YouTube, and yeah, it gets messy.
Yeah, the incentives don't make it easy. That's for certain. And it's
Yeah.
even worse if like the people making videos didn't even have a strong background in the knowledge that they're talking about before starting YouTube, because what you often get is limited time. So you have people using Wikipedia for most of their sources and often having really shallow presentations of different thinkers' theories or just analysis in general.
Mm.
So, like, I don't know, it's not even exclusive to LeftTube, but I would say it's like the whole philosophy community. There's a ton of
Yeah.
channels that literally just get all their information from Wikipedia or the Stanford.edu pages. And sometimes it's like, it's a bad bastardization of a summary that they're summarizing. And you got,
Yeah.
I'll say like one name I'll say is The School of Life is like the definition of like
That's an easy one.
the worst
Yeah.
philosophy ever. Like, I mean, it completely bastardizes things. And the incentives with uploading often don't help, but I do think one can at least make the effort to kind of, I don't know, learn about this stuff more. And if what I would prefer is just people like don't take themselves all that too seriously if they're not trying to do the research. Like if it's just pure comedy, like present it as such, you know. And when the
Yeah.
line is blurry, it is a little bit annoying. But I will say there's a bigger problem to the left sphere than just the incentives, and that's the echo chambers. Because naturally, of course, the algorithms, get feed content to people who already want it and or already in that sphere. So if you watch a couple of videos from this YouTuber, you'll get recommended videos exactly like that. And that's one thing, but what it really does to creators is they often become their audience. They kind of just become like products, producers that produce a product, which is the videos, or you could call it just ideology for the consumers who are the viewers. And it's less about trying to, I mean, it can start off, and some videos can radicalize a lot of people. There are people who get radicalized off YouTube. But you also have a lot of YouTubers who end up just appealing to their audience, and they don't make any effort to reach to new audiences or new people or to make a persuasive case. And I'll say people can probably guess already like which channels do this, but I'll name channels that I think are good and try to go across different audiences. And one's like, I think Second Thought is really excellent. Like Second Thought is a channel that makes a real deliberate effort to actually, spread ideas to different people. You can tell like his aim is to radicalize people. And I think left
Yeah.
channels need to understand that, okay, it's on one thing you can say it's entertainment and it's like a hobby, but I think spreading ideas is important. You need the deliberate goal sometimes of changing people's minds, because that's the right's goal and it works. Like the left can never establish anything. If we can't even get in Bernie Sanders in the United States or Jeremy Corbyn in the UK, you are not going to have a socialist revolution.
Yeah.
You know, so at the very least, you need to have some people. You need to have a lot of people support your ideas. And how do you do that? One way is kind of, spreading information.
I think a lot of those criticisms, I want to bring them back later in the conversation because we'll be talking about a couple of the some of the recent maybe reactions to some of the developments in blockchain and crypto world from these left tubers that are quite big. But what is the origin of your name actually?
Oh
One
yeah,
dime. Why not
yeah,
two
so
dimes?
so okay, there's a couple reasons for this, but I let people kind of interpret it differently. So there, you can interpret it differently, but I'll say just the way I came up with it is I was reading the book One Dimensional Man by Herbert Marcuse, and that's probably one of my favorite books that there is. I mean, critical theory books, because it encompasses so much of what is wrong with society and the way discourse is and how limited and just how ideology is formed, how kind of one-dimensional thinking is cultivated. And that book represents a lot of the way my political views, at least has influenced me a lot. And I could just say my channel is like a leftist channel or a Marxist channel or whatever. But I think it's more important to counter one-dimensional thought because, okay, yeah, capitalist neoliberal thought is in many ways one-dimensional thought, or political discourse or Overton window in the West is often boiled down to, are you a conservative or are you a liberal or are you a, slightly more liberal like a social democrat? But it's a very limited political sphere. But I think if you also keep yourself into like sectarian niches, you can also devolve into one-dimensional thought, like channels that are explicitly just Marxist-Leninists and only cover Lenin and Mao and no one else. And that's all they analyze from. I think that's one-dimensional too. So yeah, I did want to kind of make my channel have some flexibility to cover a lot of different things and not be bogged down to one thing. Because I don't just want to have an audience of Marxists that watches my video and that's it. I wanted to kind of have a broad audience. Like anarchists can watch my stuff too. Social libs, even libertarians. Like I wanted to appeal to a lot of people, as well as also, can say one dime. I guess you could say working class politics. That's also a way it can be interpreted. But yeah, it's also just a catchy name.
Yeah, no, I can identify with that. I mean, naturally, I think just like the name that I chose was mostly out of like lack of creativity. I just knew what I wanted to talk about, and they were two things that are not usually related to each other. So I think naturally attract a diverse audience, I guess, in terms of crypto people who are maybe interested in left politics or vice versa.
And there's also there's no blockchain socialist just channel platforms out there. There's none on YouTube. I mean, and there's like
no big ones.
There's really just your podcast, and then there's some people who are blockchain socialists, but they don't really run platforms, from what I know.
Yeah, I mean, there's the Interdependence Podcast with Holly Hearn and Matt Dryhurst, which was, I think, originally meant to be a podcast mostly about art and like music, because they're musicians. But then it's ended up becoming mostly a crypto podcast, but it's pretty good. But so maybe they're probably one of the other people that I really know that are really taking it on. And then like a couple of other, I feel like New Models is another one that I've heard of. I haven't taken too much time. But it's growing, like, because there's, I think, a need for it. And yeah, whenever I was sort of thinking about making it, I was like, eventually someone's going to have to, like, the left is going to have to learn about this at some point. So might as well help them and do their homework.
We can't let everything interesting be co-opted by the right. I mean, so much is co-opted. Like, what annoys me too is just social media is something heavily co-opted by the right. Like, the amount of, liberal academics, even left-wing academics, who I see complaining about how the alt-right has taken over YouTube and taken over Facebook. And they're saying, we need to get platforms to moderate these people. They need to, prevent racism and whatnot. And it's like, okay, you're really going to leave fighting racism and fascism to Mark Zuckerberg and like
Yeah.
these big tech CEOs? It's crazy to me. I mean, just make better stuff, make better propaganda. Like the left needs to kind of do its own propaganda. I think there's this kind
Yeah.
of, and I say propaganda in the traditional sense, which is not good or bad. Propaganda is just what makes it different, is that you're deliberately trying to persuade people. And that's
Yeah.
historically how all social movements try to do that. I just think that left wingers sometimes are a little bit deluded to thinking that they will win just by virtue of their ideas being morally superior, which I think is kind of a delusion because people's minds don't work like that. Morality is super relative for people sometimes. And I think, you have to, the left has to try to, if they see trends, they should analyze it and see whether it can benefit the left. Because I mean, if the right just co-opts everything, you're just not going to win the ideological war. It's that simple. And I think crypto, it's not only should you let the right co-opt that, but there's ways that blockchain can benefit the left, which you've talked about a lot in your podcast, of course.
Maybe the question is whether or not the left can co-opt blockchain.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, how do we co-opt stuff back? It's a battle, You just gotta treat it as such.
We got to use the
But
internet to our advantage because, I mean, back in the day, what did we do before the internet? You had people knocking on doors. You had people, um, you kind of organize in working class communities very locally. And there's I know a lot of more radical left wing groups in the Marxist fronts who do that. They're still attached to that, but that's increasingly less effective. I mean, everybody gets their information online. I'm not saying not to do local politics, but you can't rely on that. You have to reach broad audiences. You just have to be on the internet. You have to reach new people. And I wish, the left just needs to simply adapt. It's a message I say a lot.
yeah, for me, it's just use every weapon you have in your inventory. Like, why do we have to always think of it as like either or? Like, either you go see each other in person and talk to people in person only, or you only interact over the internet. Like, I think there's clearly a need for using all these different approaches. And if you're, in any sort of normal type of situation where you're trying to, I don't know, convince people of something just unpolitically related, you want to have like different avenues for doing that.
I'll give you a
Go
perfect
ahead.
example real quick. Is that okay? I remember there was some articles like from Huffington Post that attacked. They attacked Bitcoin by saying Richard Spencer uses and his white supremacist organization used Bitcoin to fund his organizations, and it's like attacking Bitcoin. It's like, you idiots! We could also do that to fund left-wing organizations. It's like,
Yeah.
why don't we do that? I mean, it's one of
Yeah.
the biggest problems with the left is funding always, because and it's like, okay, you can you can run decentralized platforms and have groups function on blockchain. You can use this in a lot of ways. Like, just because the right wing do it, that's just them adapting. It's not an indictment of the technology. The technology is neutral. The technology doesn't care, right? So it's up to us really how we view it and do it
Yeah.
what we do with it.
But so maybe maybe getting back to this question I actually wanted to ask, because I think it's sort of related to this crypto question. But your most recent article or video was a Marxist analysis of the stock market. And so I'm curious to hear, what was it like making that video? Since the stock market is sort of like I mean, finance in general, money in general is a very touchy subject on the left, and like talking about it in like in more detail than like the because we can talk about it pretty easily about like the power structures that sort of like incentivize particular behaviors and like wealth accumulation, all that. But then when you talk about like specifically the stock market and how I mean, it's quite a complex thing, or it's perceived as like a very complex thing, and it's something that the left, I mean, just sort of I feel like doesn't really like looking at. So I'm curious, what was it like making that video?
Oh yeah, so yeah, the video is called "The Socialism of Warren Buffett," and I mean it's sort of a clickbait title, but the reason why I chose that title is because Warren Buffett's own words, by his own admission, the capitalist system is dysfunctional. And what I like about Warren Buffett, he's a card-carrying capitalist, no doubt. But what I like about Warren Buffett is that he's so upfront and honest about just how brutal the capitalist system can be, and how he himself debunks the idea that billionaires are billionaires because they work harder or are just mentally superior. I mean, they just have a real big interest in money and know how to use the capitalist system, which exponentially increases wealth inequality. And I think it is crazy to me that the stock market isn't analyzed by the left enough, because the stock market is one of the biggest focal points as to how capitalism functions. Like, it's the locus of capital in many ways. It's one of the primary drivers of inequality, because rich people, of course, the richer you are, the more money you have, the more shares you can buy, and the more shares you can buy, the more exponentially you can grow your wealth, and the more dividends you can also get. By its very nature, it increases inequality, and you do so with very little labor whatsoever. And not only that, but like taxes on capital gains are very small compared to income. So that's why like raising income taxes do not affect the billionaire class. Whenever you have people like Obama or Joe Biden say, we're going to raise income taxes, and people are like, yay, progress. That's not going to do anything. Absolutely nothing. That'll affect doctors and surgeons and people like that. It won't affect, billionaire class who make their money primarily from, stocks, real estate, and ownership in their companies, which is, through the stock market. Like, Mark Zuckerberg, he has all this wealth in his Facebook stock, but he doesn't really get that wealth unless he sells his shares. And if he sells those shares, he's taxed at a lower rate as if he made that money in a salary form. That's something people forget. So I think a lot of people, because they don't understand the stock market, they don't understand solutions. So when you understand the stock market from a leftist point of view, a Marxist point of view, you can see pretty quick how things like taxes won't actually solve anything. I mean, you can theoretically implement high capital gains taxes, but they're not going to do that, because the way the tax system is structured is to help the capitalists. Like, that's another thing that Marxist analysis, and the anarchists get this as well, is that the state is inherently capitalist in capitalist societies. It's not something which exists outside of capitalism, in which there's this idea with libertarians that the state is against capital, and that the big government versus the private interest, like this Ayn Rand fantasy. But in reality, the capitalist state works precisely to reproduce capital. So in both forms, whether it be keeping business-friendly policies, but in some cases when it does things that are not business-friendly, like have increased minimum wage or regulations, that is also to continue the capitalist system. I explained that in my video called How Democrats Save Billionaires. And essentially, to prevent any kind of revolt or the destruction of private property, which often happens in really militant protests, or better yet, revolutions, this is bad for capital. And social democracy, or just even less than that, light reformism, can really prevent that, and it protects that. So this is part of my content is heavily targeted at social democrats and liberals too, because I think there's this disconnect. Let's be in the middle. Let's just have capitalism, but regulate it more friendly capitalism. And I think it's highly delusional, and it's impossible also on a structural level. It's not sustainable. So okay, another example. I was listening. What made me really want to make this video particularly, so I was listening to Democracy Now!, which is a pretty good news channel, but it's social democratic at the end of the day. And they were saying Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, and Jeff Bezos have a combined something $1 trillion in their bank accounts. Well, no, they don't. It's not in their bank accounts. The fact that they said that, it shows that they don't understand capitalism. They have that much in assets. It's not in their bank accounts, literally. Like, they don't have that cash at their disposal. So you can't just take that so easily. It's a matter of capital. And you can say, oh, we could tax capital gains, but that won't affect them unless they sell their shares. It doesn't prevent their kids from inheriting those billions. So how do you really, what is the root of the problem is ownership. That's where I bring in Marxism. It's the fact that people don't own what they produce. Why? Let's say I have, I don't know, let's say I have $2 million. I can make far more from Tesla than an employee at Tesla. Isn't that broken, right? The person who contributes value for a company is not entitled directly to a certain ownership of it. Whereas a person with a lot of money can just buy ownership and get entitled to the fruits more than the people producing it. So this is what Marxism is about. It's about analyzing ownership structure of capitalism. So that's what I wanted to do with the stock market.
Hey everyone, if you're enjoying this episode so far, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, share with a friend, and join the crypto leftist communities on Discord or Reddit, which you can find links to in the show notes. If you're enjoying the interview or find the content I make important, you can pitch into my efforts starting at $3 a month on patreon.com/theblockchainsocialist to help me out and join the newest patrons like Drew and the 30 plus other patrons. Any amount really helps since making the stuff isn't free in terms of money or time. And as a patron, you'll get a shout out on an episode like I just did and access to Patreon exclusive content like Q&A episodes where you can submit and vote on questions you'd like me to answer, and I'll give my thoughts in roughly 20 minutes. On the latest Patreon exclusive Q&A episode, I gave my hot take on NFTs. Of course, I'll still be making free content like this interview to help spread the message that blockchain does not need to be used to further entrench capitalist exploitation if we put our efforts into it. So if that message resonates with you, I hope you'll consider helping out. Thanks for your support, and let's get back to the interview with One Dime. Yeah, I think like the analogy that they probably use, these billionaires having it in their bank account. I mean, maybe they said it because they wanted to simplify what is they perceive as like a very complex thing, but in reality, like it's not that complex, and it's not like it is something that is explainable if you try, and maybe just like because of previous generations of like I don't know being sort of disgusted by it and not wanting to take a part of it made it difficult for them to be able to explain like this is the value of their ownership, and ownership is like a key component of owning the means of production.
I think there's a lot of reasons. We aren't really educated on these things if you really think about it. We're not educated. We're certainly not educated from a leftist perspective. That's for sure. Like it depends where you
school neither.
Depends where you live, but especially like where I grew up in Canada, as well as America, UK, heavily Cold War propaganda still floods education system. But not only that, but we're just not even educated about finance in a lot of ways. And I see this often in crypto communities actually, where in just kind of finance people, where they'll say we're not educated about how to do our taxes, to run our business, to run businesses. How come we're educated to be workers? Why is that? The education system's broken. To that I say, well, it's not broken. It's doing exactly what it's intended to do. Most of us are supposed to be workers, and then a small amount of capitalists who essentially profit from the work of workers. So that's the capitalist system. I try to explain that. But I think there is a disconnect as to how this all works. With a democracy now, maybe they're saying it to simplify, but I do see like a lot of just outlets, or not just outlets, but like the left in general tends to not understand how wealth accumulation works. Because I remember when Elon Musk became officially the richest person in the world, which he is no longer, I don't think, but officially on paper the richest, and they're like, oh, he got the richest, tax him. And it's like, okay, he got like richer than Bezos just because Tesla went bonkers. Tesla stock went bonkers. Like and it's super overvalued. Like that's going to come down eventually, right? So it's not
theoretically. I don't know.
Well, theoretically, according to the market logic, but it's not so simple. It's boils down to ownership, I think. And I know some people who say, well, Elon Musk has this much in profit. Well, no, he doesn't. I mean, I think Tesla only recently became a profitable company. Same with Amazon became a profitable company, I think, in 2016. And it's much more abstract than that. It's not even like old capital where it's like you own a business and you get the profits, and the surplus value goes to the owners. It's far more complex than that. I mean, ownership, you can get rich off owning a company that makes zero money, like Bumble, for example. The CEO of Bumble is a billionaire. Bumble makes no money.
Oh my God, the amount of like LinkedIn posts that that I saw around this woman from Bumble was it was mind-boggling. It was crazy. Whenever I think I read a Twitter or a tweet saying that she grew up like extremely wealthy. I forgot what the exact story was, but basically she like owned like several or like a couple of apartments like at the campus that she went and studied at. You know, there's always like this story behind. It's just always like 90% of the time the people who become billionaires are already super rich. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's like Elon Musk
in my
emerald mine.
experience, yeah, yeah. In my experience, you know, I mean, there is this complaint about how schools don't teach you about, you know, entrepreneurship, or they don't teach you how to do your taxes, or, you know, teach you finance. But the people who do teach you are like your rich parents. Generally, in my experience, I mean, it tends to be the kids who had the most privilege, or like whose parents were also business owners. I mean, they learned it from their parents. So in a certain sense, like that knowledge is sort of like naturally gate kept to a certain extent. You have to do a lot. You have to, you know, do a lot more in order to get that same amount of knowledge to start a business or whatever.
100%.
But one of the really interesting thing that I found in your video about Warren Buffett and the stock market was the quote from Marx about how he was speculating on stocks. And he seemed like, to me, what I like about Marx in that particular situation, that he sort of acts like an anthropologist of capitalism, not solely just a philosopher. Like, in, you know, he's partaking in the thing that he's criticizing and is able to get insights out of that, I think. But yeah, that's maybe sort of one of my thoughts, that one of the reasons I really like to see this sort of anthropological approach as opposed to maybe a purely philosophical or purely, like, I don't know, I guess literature type of approach.
Yeah, well, that's
Yeah.
what I really like about Marx is well, they call it scientific socialism for a reason, and you can have debates whether it's really scientific, but far more empirical than I would say all political philosophies, because Marxism isn't about just a bunch of abstract ideals like Rousseau's or Locke's liberalism, where Marxism is an analysis of real
Or
conditions.
libertarianism.
Yeah, oh my God, yeah. I included that bit about Marx trading stocks and bonds because I kind of wanted to show a couple things. So Marx's analysis, and this is obvious to anyone who's read like a bit of Das Kapital or the Grundrisse or any of Marx's other writings aside from the Communist Manifesto, and that is Marx's analysis is not a moral one. Karl Marx is not, Marxism is not about just abstract ideals like liberalism was about liberty, for égalité, fraternité, and all of that. Marxism is an analysis about real economic conditions, which are, of course, subject to change. And Marx would have a really easy way to debunk the classic libertarian argument, which is, oh, you live in capitalism, but you make money. Hypocrite. And it's like, well, you live in capitalism. You don't really have a choice. Like, it's not really voluntary participation. I mean, you have to survive. Like, we're not guaranteed housing. We're not guaranteed healthcare. We're not guaranteed education. We're not guaranteed a lot of things in life. You have to, get the bag. Like the fact that Marx speculated in stocks, I mean, it's funny, but it doesn't fully surprise me just knowing the type of analyst he was. He wasn't, Marx was not just saying rich people bad, poor people are good, and because they're poor. I mean, that's a kind of like Nietzschean slave morality.
Yeah.
It's not what it's based on whatsoever. I mean, Marx analyzed just the conditions of capitalism and how they objectively are, and he was not under any illusion that capitalism was worse than feudalism. I mean, it was a progression, of course, and it's revolutionary in many ways, but it's also increasingly absurdly brutal. That's where his like dialectical analysis comes in, as he analyzes the contradictions of capitalism and the things that were revolutionary about it, and also its brutal aspects. So you kind of analyze just the way the ownership structures work, the accumulation of capital, and it's not a moral case. He said capitalism does this, not capitalism is bad because of this abstract ideal. It's not what the analysis is. And there's some libertarian illusions that Marxism is based on ressentiment, and it's just an envy, which is absolutely absurd. Like, it's not like they're just jealous of rich people and wanted to take them down and redistribute everything. I mean, Engels owned a textile factory. He inherited a textile factory. He had no incentives whatsoever to, be a communist. And I mean, Marx obviously, participated in the capitalist system. And anyone who thinks this is hypocritical, okay, there's far more hypocrisy in other fields of thought. Like John Locke was talking about liberty while owning slaves, right? Or having an investment in the slave trade, rather, not owning slaves directly. But still, like, you find it doesn't really delegitimize the argument at all. So what this means is I also included the Marx trading stocks for another reason. So the line between worker and capitalist is actually kind of blurry, especially now, because most people who work full-time jobs and often have, especially in America, they have 401k plans. So it's kind of, they have indirectly ownership of capital, whether by owning the whole market in the form of mutual funds, index funds, and whatnot. And just because these people own that in their 401ks, that doesn't make them like filthy evil capitalists. It's just the way the system is. And the reason why I include that as well is because there is some people, like a kind of vulgar socialists, which don't really read the literature very much, and they do they just like post the guillotine memes and just want to kill rich people. And I think that mindset's a little bit dangerous, because you can, like, we're not trying to vilify Bob who works in the office for FedEx or whatever, like, or like, you don't want to vilify just like middle class people who are, I mean, they're just living in the system.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's dangerous because you have had movements in the past, like the Cultural Revolution under Mao, which was very much carried out by the people. I mean, it was kind of a mob rule, and you got a lot of innocent people dying because you had a lot of, the peasantry, the proletariat were just really angry at these sort of what are called the rich peasants at the time, or like kind of kulaks, at least that's what they called them in Russia. And you had a lot of unnecessary deaths in that scenario. So I showed in that way. I think Marxism at its core is a systemic analysis. It's not just about killing the bourgeoisie. Like, I think it's ridiculous, because how do we even define that now? I mean, it's about abolishing class. It's not about abolishing people.
I feel it's sort of like I think it's in a world where you have so little ability to express like yourself. I mean, like, to express your like political beliefs in like a positive way when you're on the left, that you sort of revert to these type of cathartic posting, like online posting, just because it feels good to do that.
I saw a ridiculous poll once where it said, if you could get rid of one thing, which would you choose? And it said Amazon, and then it said the police, the state, racism. And people chose the two things that were like polling the highest were Amazon and racism.
No.
What? And it's like, okay, if you got rid of Amazon, first of all, like, you would have another Amazon. And there are other Amazons, like there's the Amazon in China and there's Amazon in Singapore. And you have an Amazon in Latin America. I mean, you just have big CEOs get replaced by other ones. And ultimately, what I don't like is there's this mindset that rich people like Bezos, Elon Musk are bad because they're rich. That's not why they're bad. Or it's the structure is bad because it doesn't reward people who work, whereas it rewards people who just simply own and collect. That's the system what is bad. Because then you get these weird views that romanticize small business a lot. Like, you say, oh, big business is bad, small business is good. And it's like small businesses exploit the workers just as much, sometimes more than big businesses.
Yeah. If you've ever worked at a small business with like a tyrannical CEO, or like, there's a very controlling person who started it. I mean, it can be a whole lot worse than working in a big company where you're just a number and you can sort of hide.
Yeah, like working for restaurants is a perfect example. Like, absolutely brutal, often like heavily. That's why tips even exist. Tips exist because, like, the small capitalists aren't going to pay that. And it's you could say that they're bad, but it's really also an incentive structure. Like, if you pay your workers too much, you often run out of business. Just it's simple how the capitalist system is. It's like a competition isn't good. I don't like this idea that we need to get rid of big tech and just establish competitive capitalism. Actually, competitive capitalism was the most brutal era of capitalism. I'll say that. Like, competitive capitalism is sort of the era of capitalism that took place before Teddy Roosevelt broke up the big monopolies, which eventually fomented. So, like, you had competitive capitalism really in the 1800s. That was what Marx was actually mostly analyzing. Competitive capitalism was probably the most brutal era of capitalism to ever exist. I mean, you have a race to the bottom, and then you have the formation of big monopolies, which obviously, that's what happens. You get like a Gilded Age inequality, and then now we're reaching that again. And we also kind of still are, we're not just because we're in a monopoly capitalism doesn't mean it's not competitive. We're just competing with labor in the third world. So you have kind of a race to the bottom in labor and costs, and then I think a systemic analysis is always important, because then you get really lofty solutions like, okay, just taxing rich people, I think like socialism is about empowering working people. It's not about just killing rich people. It's about empowering working people and changing the structure so that you can do that. And when you change the ownership structure, you don't even have billionaires in the first place.
Yeah, that's the goal. Just no billionaires being created in the first place. Or I guess because billionaire could be you could be a billionaire easily in some countries just because of the way that their money is denominated, but having the extreme inequality.
Yeah, 100%.
Did you receive any pushback for that video?
I did not. I didn't really. Well, I mean, I got some comments from libertarians as usual, which is a good sign, because I at least I'm reaching
them. Means the algorithm is showing your video to them.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's always a couple of comments where people are like, but these CEOs, they create jobs, and if they didn't create the jobs, why there wouldn't be any jobs? And it's like, okay, well, first of all, the state can create jobs, and they don't just create jobs. There's this idea of that billionaires they create based on how much people produce. So like, if people are buying their stuff and they have to produce more, they'll hire more people. It's not like benevolence or anything. It's a really, like, libertarian ideology. It's a really one hell of a drug that's steeped into our collective unconscious. But I don't think I think I would have probably get a little bit more pushback if it was bigger, because I think my channel is still new and very underrated. So if it had more views, you'd probably see more pushback. But because my channel is pretty small still, and I have mostly like a really like a strong, like a following that just watches my stuff regularly, but it's a really small one, I think you don't have a lot of pushback. I got, like I said, most of the pushback was from like libertarians. But that's to be expected. But from the left, not really. I think no. I mean,
they understood.
There's nothing you can really say to the facts. Like if someone said, "Oh, Marx traded stocks," and it's like, yeah, so Engels owned the factory.
if Marx was alive today, do you think he would be trading Dogecoin?
I would be surprised if he did. Yeah. So I honestly think Marx would find a lot of the left really cringy today. I think he would be analyzing. I think Marx would be really interested in cryptocurrency, because the type of thinker he was always ahead. He always wanted to explore what reality is, like what's happening, not just stuck in ideals. And I mean, I like the visions. I like the decentralized libertarian socialism that anarchists envision a lot. Like I usually like anarchists, and in many ways I'm influenced by some anarchist thinkers like Murray Bookchin myself. But I always think Marxism is just a way better analysis, because anarchism does have that problem where it's stuck in ideals often, where it's about the ideal of communism, a stateless, moneyless, classless society. Well, first of all, we need to get there. And to even think about how to get there, you have to understand the conditions we're already in. And capitalism is not the same capitalism we were in before. So I think, we would have Marx would, probably have a whole different, you would have Das Crypto.
I would, yeah. I'm taking that title for if I ever decide to write a book.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, Das Crypto.
I also noticed that in your videos, you like to use quite a lot of SpongeBob scenes in your videos as well. And as an avid watcher as a child, I completely respect that. Yeah, I guess, is there just maybe a side question? Is there something that you think that show lends itself well to left tube? Because I think I see it every once in a while, and it's like, I don't know, maybe it's just like the our generation of people, of kids who grew up watching SpongeBob and is quite nostalgic, but also like I feel like the as we get older, I think we begin to identify with Squidward more and more. You know, we all have a Mr. Krabs in our life that drives us insane.
that show is certainly very archetypical in many ways. Like there's a lot of archetypes going on in there. But yeah, I mean, well, in it is common in LeftTube to have like references to various shows. Like there's a lot of Family Guy here and there. Simpsons is very popular, but like I mean, I'm a '90s kid, a late '90s kid, and I kind of grew up or mid late '90s, and I kind of grew up on SpongeBob. So it's also, and in one sense, I just find some scenes in that show like just hilarious to, like just really hilarious to plug in, and also I think it's appealing to kind of the audience that I'm appealing to. I mean, it's something that resonates with the, I guess you could say, the Zoomer millennial unconscious in many ways. It's something that just resonates, and it just makes the content more digestible, lighthearted, and funny. But also sometimes like simple archetypes that are personified in SpongeBob can be a lot. Like there's like Mr. Krabs is the quintessential petite bourgeoisie, right?
Yeah, he is the dictator. He's like the small business dictator.
Exactly, and it's a perfect example of how like big business is, small business is not always like, it's not always more ethical than or better than big business. So it's like that, and Squidward is like, like the disenfranchised proletariat, and SpongeBob and Patrick are like the duped proletariat. And it's like, I don't know, there's this funny scenes I like to include in there. I don't know, it's just really funny. There's like, I don't know, that I think the scene I included was there was a scene where they're like, who wants free money?
Yeah. I mentioned this exact same scene in a previous interview, actually. It's a very good one.
Yeah, modern monetary theory in a nutshell. Yeah, I mean, it's like sometimes you need some stuff that is absurd to kind of destabilize the what we perceive as the laws of reality. Like, for example, so many people think that we have an economy that acts like our governments act like a business, and you have to make more than you spend, and that the deficit matters a lot. And I think people have a lot of misunderstanding about just how, money is literally created, and money's value is not determined just solely by how much of it exists. It's how much it's circulated. It's a big factor. So there's the velocity of money. There's all these things that are important. And I think people just, don't get that. And it's funny, like how you have like shows like SpongeBob that just have scenes that perfectly personify the illogic of society.
So maybe let's start shifting more and more into crypto world. Maybe you could explain briefly what are some of your thoughts around crypto and blockchain, and like how did you get started on it? Like what was it from your your background in philosophy and critical theory that drew you towards it?
Yeah, so I had two friends who were really avid crypto investors, one which made a lot of money, one which lost a lot of money. And I always kind of saw it as like a fringe kind of like a really fringe just investment world for people who wanted to get rich quick. And I didn't really see much of it. It wasn't until I started looking into Bitcoin, and then I started really looking into Ethereum, and I remember learning about just how they're different. And particularly the aspect of smart contracts was really interesting to me with Ethereum, because I saw like I don't see, I mean, Bitcoin is revolutionary in many ways, but I don't see a big use case, or I didn't, beyond really a digital gold, the store of value. Whereas Ethereum, I could immediately tell with smart contracts is when so much of capitalism is based on middlemen parasitic subtraction. So it's like taking profits from things as a mediary. And that's so much of how capitalism works, increasingly in the rentier economy. And I could immediately see how there might to be a use case for this. I wasn't sure yet, and I still think crypto is in its very early stages. But at the very least, it's worth learning about and really exploring, because I don't see this technology as innately right wing or left wing. I mean, it's like the biggest, obviously, cryptos like Bitcoin, Polkadot, Ethereum, Chainlink. They're used as like investments a lot now, mainly, and that's how it is. But it doesn't mean that the technology, people often misconstrue how it's used in a capitalist society versus that is just what the technology can do. And there's all kind of interesting things with these blockchains can do. And I think that's worth exploring. Like, it's not something that should be ceded to the right for just strategic reasons, but simply, I mean, we need to actually think about what a post-capitalist society can look like and what infrastructure can really support it. I think there's anarchists out there who think that we can just go to a stateless, classless, moneyless society. Communism, a big part of it is moneyless. We want to be in Star Trek, right? Okay, but I'm always skeptical as to how exactly you can transition there, and that's where I'm more of a Marxist than an anarchist. I think you need some kind of transition. Like for Marx, he used the words socialism and communism interchangeably, but for him it was lower phase communism comes before higher phase communism, which is when there's a stateless, classless, moneyless society. So I see crypto could have a lot to help us with like a intermediary for a kind of post-capitalism, and that does interest me. That's so. I kind of just learning a bit about the technologies made me curious, and I started looking up. I was surprised by the lack of stuff from a left-wing perspective on it. And there's some people who are broadly. I suspect a bit like that Vitalik Buterin is like kind of like a socialist in some ways, because he calls himself like a collectivist. And he speaks in a lot of socialist terms, but he also he doesn't really express his politics much, and I think there's a reason why, because he doesn't want to get all the libertarians mad.
Partially, yeah. I think he's also confused, to be honest. I mean,
most people are confused. Yeah. Like most people think they're like, okay, I'm a leftist because I'm like want to help people, whereas libertarians are like, I want my profit, bitch.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's at the very least like probably a fairly reasonable person, I get the impression, as compared to a lot of other founders of crypto-related projects and companies. And so I think because he's nice, sometimes he's perceived as maybe like kind of a socialist, or because he's also talked a bit about public goods in the like Ethereum environment, and how to fund public goods within Ethereum environments, whenever like in comparison to what you're seeing with Bitcoin. Like I think Bitcoin is just like the most simplistic thing ever made with a blockchain, obviously because it's the first one, and you're seeing what the sort of results of that is, and that they've sort of completely stagnated in terms of new developments on the Bitcoin network. I mean, Lightning Network, I mean, who fucking uses it? It's not useful. You don't have a fraction of the type of functions that you have with Ethereum and other blockchains that have smart contracts, and they have no way of like funding the developers who are working on Bitcoin. So it fit well as a libertarian from the surface, but like now you're seeing the results of what that type of idealism has sort of like what it leads to, and which is like a stagnating project that is like solely really being done to speculate.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that immediately made me skeptical of Bitcoin very early on, and I noticed one glaring contradiction, and that was that all the people in r/Bitcoin and r/cryptocurrency were simultaneously talking about this decentralized future and moving away from the big banks. And how the future is decentralized, and we need decentralized finance will take over, and even more, the biggest delusion was that Bitcoin will become the world reserve currency. I mean, like that's the ultimate delusion, right? And so you have like these talking points, but at the same time, whenever like big banks buy Bitcoin, they're celebrating because their investments go up. So like simultaneously, because they're treating it as an investment, they while they talk about this idea of post-banking and like moving away from the big banks, and crypto is destabilizing traditional finance, but at the same time they're like they want the banks to be buying up Bitcoin so that their investments can do well. And that's such a glaring contradiction. And I think this is a big. I mean, I think right libertarianism is like a field of contradictions in general, because they tend to always think that, certain things will just happen. Like they talk solely in ideals, and like these ideals will just happen. So they'll say like, okay, decentralization or like a true free market, but they have they don't have an analysis of power.
I mean, the extent of their analysis is like taxation is theft, really. That's their analysis of power.
Yeah, and I honestly think, as crypto becomes more mainstream, there's good and bad things about that. I mean, there's all kind of other projects that people don't really know about, which aren't mainstream at all, which are a little more interesting to me. But I think like Bitcoin being mainstream, that's more of an indictment of Bitcoin than anything, because the fact that you have so many countries like embracing it, it's really just it's a store of value for rich people. It's going to make the rich richer. Like it's not. I don't see it as this challenging thing. But there's aspects of blockchain technology, which of course Bitcoin only hits the surface. It's like it's very early stage compared to the other developments. Like even Ethereum or Cardano. So I think people often on the left, on the others to flip the side, is people on the left react to Bitcoin as an investment, and the fact that you have people like Elon Musk owning it, that it's something bad just because they don't like Elon Musk, that he owns it must be bad, and it's dismissed. And also that's the illogical component, and there is the kind of logical concern, which is the environment, the amount of electricity that mining takes. So I understand that, and also just like maintaining the networks, but I understand that concern, but I think people are a little too quick to dismiss, especially on the left.
Yeah, I guess maybe what do you think the left usually gets wrong from a Marxist point of view? Like, what do you think is usually missing? 'Cause I mean, there's the very common belief or sentiment that is very anti-crypto and anti-blockchain. It's to me it seems like it's just like a I think there's this term used in like a ContraPoints video once, but it's like the association of association of association of like all these different things that you already don't like.
I don't know about that, but I would say it's a ressentiment a lot of the time. So I wouldn't say like most of these people who are reacting to it aren't even Marxists. Like I'd say Marxism is still very my fringe minority of the left. The left is very much still social democrat. And then, of course, there's the bread tube that are anarchists. But I don't really see a lot of people like, I mean, I see anarchists. I don't take it too seriously because a lot of anarchists aren't really studying anarchist theory and practicing anarchist tactics. It's more just like, I'm the socialism, but not the authoritarian kind, right?
Yeah.
But I do think, okay, the reason why they hate, they dislike crypto often is because they view things morally. And this has been a big problem for me with the left. I would say it's exclusive to most of the way a lot of people think politically. A lot of people think morally, both on the left and the right, but it hurts the left more in that the left sometimes is way too quick to judge things morally and not analytically. And you end up having really poor analysis, really quick judgments. And it's really annoying to me sometimes because you do then fall into what Friedrich Nietzsche, one of my favorite philosophers, who's not a left-wing philosopher, but Friedrich Nietzsche called slave morality, in which, in a sense, slave morality is less... Okay, so part of what maintained the feudal order of the time in which he was writing about, which is that like slaves, their position would be maintained by kind of a kind of Christianity that would call that the meek shall inherit the earth, that the people who are poor are good because they're poor, not because of their position or what they do. They're good because they're poor, and rich are bad because they're bad. The rich are in their position, don't change things. The rich will go to hell. And of course, this all changed with Calvinism and Protestantism, which was more like making money is good and all of that. So, but I do see that the kind of morality lingers a little bit. Is that something, if it benefits rich people, it must be bad, and that yeah, it's kind of a really lofty analysis, in my opinion. I really wish people analyze things more like based on what is happening and not always morally, because morals are abstract and can be seen relatively, and people can twist morals to fit what they already want to do. I think the left should think more in terms of power and economic relations. That's always more important to me. So what is bad about Bitcoin? Well, it's not so much the technology they criticize. It's the fact that like people who already are in dominant positions of power, have can get more ownership of it. That's just how the capitalist system is. That's indictment of capitalism, not crypto, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's how I see it, is a lot of short-sighted moral analysis. It's so clear that they haven't really dug into what is actually happening in crypto beyond a surface level, because I mean, what Web 3.0 is trying to achieve is like a kind of more communist internet. And okay, why we can look at why is the internet, some aspects of the internet are innately communist, like you could say Wikipedia, all kind of things, like many things that are kind of decentralized and not motivated by profit, really. But like, why is the internet not a communist? Why did it get ruined in many ways? Well, first of all, it started off centralized from the get-go, but also it kind of became when we went to Web 2.0 to kind of distributed networks, which was, I mean, on an infrastructural level, kind of decentralized, but not in terms of control. Control is still very much centralized, if not actually more centralized within platforms. So how do we change that? Well, we can have revolution, we can collectivize, but like, what can we do right now? Okay, so like I see Web 2.0 and cryptocurrency is like an infrastructure for the internet that can kind of is a very interesting experiment, to say the least. Like, do we want to have the internet be a collective commons? Like, I think that's a real discussion. How do we make that happen? And okay, another thing which is a little bit deeper, because this is much more futuristic and I guess beyond the scope of our society now. But okay, let's say we want to go to moneyless, classless society. I see no scenario in which there isn't some kind of transition, but to have a moneyless, classless society, you need to not have dependence on the state. Well, how do you have not dependence? How do you grow out of dependence on the state? Well, I think this blockchain does offer many opportunities in many ways, and can, as it, I think, gets more advanced and we find more things to do with it, is the way just humans can function and own the internet and do things without reliance on the state. We need to figure out ways to actually, I guess you could say, this sounds a little stereotypical, but like live the revolution. You need to get people actually feeling what like a more collectivist society / system even can be like, so people can envision it. We need to at least be creative, explore these things. It's a little bit premature, in my opinion, just to kind of, brush all of this off because of it happens to be co-opted by rich people. I think there's this delusion that because something is co-opted by capitalism, it's necessarily bad, but everything can be co-opted by capitalism.
Thanks a lot for taking the time. It was really interesting to get your perspective, especially from a Marxist point of view and, from a critical theory point of view. People should definitely check out your channel. So maybe to wrap it up, you can let people know where they can find that and where they can keep up with you.
Yeah, my YouTube channel is called One Dimes. So the number one and then dime, all in one word. So just One Dime. And you can find me on YouTube. You can also find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is therapnerd7. You can follow me there. In terms of my videos, the ones I'd recommend the most are probably the recent one we were talking about, which is the Socialism of Warren Buffett, kind of a Marxist analysis of the stock market. I put a lot of effort into the visuals, the editing. It's kind of like it's really entertaining stuff, in my opinion, anyway. And the other video I'd recommend is how Democrats save billionaires. That's a short little documentary I made, which is interesting about understanding the long-term and short-term interests of capitalism and the roles the Democrats play historically in kind of maintaining capitalism by being the other side of the coin. And yeah, it's if you kind of want a good analysis, but also very entertaining, and maybe even some videos to radicalize your friends and family with, yeah, feel free to check out the channel.
Yeah, definitely. I think they're pretty approachable for people even who are not left wing or socialists themselves. Especially the Democrats and the billionaires one, I think would be great for showing, like, I don't know, your conservative uncle who votes Republican and thinks Nike is communist or something.
Yeah, exactly.
But right, yeah, thanks a lot for taking the time, and yeah, good luck. People check out his YouTube channel.